Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined on this very sunny morning by Karen Wright from Sage Health and Wellness. And she's going to say a little bit more about what that actually is. But Karen is here to share her recovery story, to give us all some hope and some ideas. And I'm excited to hear what worked for you, Karen. So a very warm welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to meet you.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. It's great to meet you and it's great to talk to you. I'm excited to delve into things today.
Absolutely. And, just on a total tangent, isn't it wonderful, this idea of connection? We lose so much connection when we can't do things. And I think certainly for me, one of the silver linings has been all of these wonderful, incredible people that I have connected with, because we would never have met otherwise.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of it is connecting with ourselves as well. As part of the recovery journey, that connections with the wider sort of mandala of people who have been through similar experiences is so valuable, isn't it? And so validating.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, that's a really good point, sort of reconnecting with ourselves. Because certainly for me, I had kind of discovered that I had totally lost any connection I had with myself. So let's talk a little bit about you and your journey. So what was life like before you became unwell? And when was that?
Okay. Yeah, so I got ill in autumn 2021. So prior to that, I just had my 40th birthday. I was working full time in the NHS as a physiotherapist, in a management role. I had two boys, my boys were around about 10 and 12, I think, at that time. And I was on the go. I was loving my fitness, I was doing lots of functional fitness, CrossFit, climbing mountains, kind of just embracing life, enjoying myself, and very active and very on, shall we say. On. There wasn't much of the off switch being utilised at that time in my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, that this is a very common theme, isn't it? And it's not that it was your fault because you didn't ask for this. But that benefit of hindsight is very, very interesting, I think, because I can relate to a lot of what you were saying, the always being on. It was almost like for me, the idea of taking time off was insulting. Why would I want to do that? That's showing weakness. We can't do that. It was bad. Whereas, obviously my perspective on it now is very different to that, but it's part of the process, I think, for me. So yeah, so you were living this sort of very, very full, very busy life. And then you became unwell in, you said, autumn 2021. So this was about 18 months into the sort of COVID pandemic, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yes, it was about 18 months, and I was in the thick of it in the health service. I Ironically, I was involved with developing our long COVID rehabilitation service. I did some research into long COVID. Wasn't really anything I didn't know about long COVID at that time from a kind of an intellectual perspective, you know. But it was intense, that 18 months, as you can imagine. We in our health board, we set up a field hospital. So I was involved in developing that. So yeah, you're right. It was about 18 months. Um, and the lived experience, I have to say, when I wasn't recovering from the infection, was an entirely different thing to the intellectual understanding that I had previously. And actually, I think although that was there and that understanding was there, because of the nature of the symptoms and particularly the brain fog, it was so dense. You can't see the wood for the trees, can you? So it was almost unhelpful. I really needed, like we were talking about connection, I needed that external guide, I suppose, to help me to navigate through a lot of it. I mean, yeah, it was an incredible change of state and change of normality. Like being hit by a sledgehammer, you know. I had this list of symptoms, like 16 different symptoms. I couldn't do anything, I couldn't care for my children. My husband picked up majority of that, because it was quite potsy presentation. So there were times when I couldn't even raise a voice, I couldn't even find energy to make sound, let alone think of a response to a question. Work was out the window, training was out the window. I couldn't drive. I could barely travel in a car, to be honest. So it was a shock. It was a huge shock, and it was a huge loss and a trauma, a big trauma.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think, this is a really good point that you made that the sort of clinical understanding, let's say that you had, you said, I knew everything about long COVID, you'd written the book on long COVID,
Mm.
but what you didn't have was the lived experience, and then you did. And when you
Mm.
did have the lived experience, it was almost like, whoa, I might have known, but I didn't know, kind of thing. And I think, yeah, it's very, very illuminating, I think, to have experience of something that you understand. And I think, probably the majority of people with long COVID came in not knowing
Mm.
really anything about it, and have then sort of flipped it the other way, become ill, and then learned more. So it's very interesting that you were sort of the other way around with that,
Mm.
but actually that it didn't really make the experience any easier. On some level, maybe it made it harder. I don't know.
Well, I
Different.
had this, it was obviously we were still developing our knowledge base in 2021. It was back in the early
Mm,
days.
mm,
Um, yeah, I knew that people were very ill, and I knew that a lot of people weren't getting better too. So it was scary, and um, yeah, it was tough to sort of have that knowledge base of seeing and knowing what lots of other people had gone through and other people's experiences, the people we were seeing through the health service, and thinking, well, what's it going to be like for me? Is it going to be like this or is it going to be like that? Um, so yeah, and as I said, to have the objectivity of mind to implement some of the strategies was a challenge in itself, and that's
yeah.
why I'm picking up on this theme of connection again. That's why it is so important that we have these connections and that we support each other, because knowing and doing are two different things.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
it really, really is.
Mm.
And I remember saying I'm not sure if it was after I was recovered or if I was still unwell at the time, but making some comment about, how people who get long COVID sort of 2 or 3 years into the sort of pandemic have a much easier job of it. And then immediately thinking, actually, is that true? And I don't
Mm,
think it's an easier or harder equation, really. I think for me, I was right at the start. There was very little knowledge of long COVID, and I spent a lot of time doing the wrong things because no one was telling me what the right things were. But at the same time, if I'd come into it knowing that there were people 3 years in who hadn't recovered yet, like, that would have been absolutely horrific. So, yeah, I think it's a very different experience, that there is a lot more help out there if you know where to look, but that doesn't necessarily negate any of the other stuff. Um, and it's not about things being harder or easier anyway, is it? It's, everyone's experience is probably one of the worst ones that they will ever have. So, yeah. So you said, you had a very sort of potsy presentation, that, yeah, you weren't able to do things. And I think, that's one of the things, isn't it? Whatever your presentation is and whatever your specific symptoms or severity of it, you lose the ability to do things that make your life up. Your entire life is turned upside down to some level. And that is pretty horrific, both physically and mentally and emotionally. That we lose our identity, we lose the ability to do things that make us smile, we lose our jobs, maybe our families don't interact with us in the same way, or we don't interact with them in the same way. You said you have children, so that must have been a really difficult thing for you, that sort of not being able to be the person in your family group that you have always been, I would imagine. We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
yeah, so I totally, and I think the point about identity
Mm,
is really big, isn't it? Because it's what we
yeah,
have always attached our identity to, around this doing and these relationships, who I am, and this, I'm a caring person, for example, I help people, and when that's taken away, it is a grief, and you're sort of
yeah,
left uh, quite fearful, I guess, and quite just yeah, just questioning who I am, who am I?
yeah,
What's this mean for me? So yeah, it was yeah, it was one of the, definitely one of the worst experiences of my life. Um, and I don't say that lightly. Of course, we all go through our stuff. Um, it's brought a depth of learning, and it's changed me. And actually, with the benefit of hindsight, I wouldn't change the experience, just because of the richness of what I've learned and how I've evolved through that. Of course, I wouldn't have said that at the time. But I think your point as well about there's no worse than or better than is really important, because it's individual, isn't it? And it's how things land for us. I mean, I've seen lots of people with these illnesses and know to present the same, you know. Everybody has their unique experience, Yeah, and how that lands for them is really, I guess, uh, it's not important really. It's better than or worse than somebody else's experience. It's what's meaningful to them.
Exactly, and it's validating that experience
Mm.
in each individual person. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so what did you start to find, or even how did you start to find things that did help?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think in the beginning I had this sense of injustice, because I wasn't working, I wasn't parenting, I wasn't going to the gym. I dropped like 90% of my life, but I was still crashing or booming and busting or however you want to express it, PEM essentially. Um, so yeah, there was that. So I sort of had to get through that anger phase, I think, and move through to a little bit of acceptance and think, okay, I need to look a little bit more closely. So that's what I started to do, and I started to notice lots of things that drained my energy, the smaller things in the day, So little things like being in an upright position uh, would be a drain. Having a conversation, the effort of listening and processing information. Light, just being in an environment of light was depleting for me. Digesting food was uh, was energy demanding. So when I started to look a little bit closer to my body, I started to come up with this kind of bigger picture of where my energy was being spent. Um, yeah, and that was really the turning point, I suppose, of moving towards finding baseline. Um, like I said, this energy of digesting food was a golden piece of information for me to realize that that was happening. One day, I remember actually in the early days, in our part of the country, we sometimes eat fish and chips from the takeaway. Uh, so and it's a large meal and it's quite sort of dense and energy rich. It's quite a lot of fat. It's deep fried. So we had this dinner one night. It was a Friday night, and by the Sunday I still couldn't walk. I was so absolutely depleted after this just one meal, which wouldn't have bothered me in the slightest prior to the illness. But like I said, this was golden information because there was something there. This was a variable that I could change. This was something that I could control. So that was the start. That was the first thing I changed, really, was the nutrition. I dialed right into what I was eating, how my body was feeling, and I started to eat a low histamine diet. Um, and what I noticed after the first 24 hours of eating in that way, the body just calmed down. I was feeling this regular, like a revving. I describe it as a revving, like a car revving in the body, just this releasing of adrenaline all the time and so upregulated. And it calmed after eating in this way. And it was such a relief. And I feel my breathing drop and the sleep was restorative for the first time in months. It was almost blissful. I still had all these other symptoms and all these limitations, but it was hope. I really found hope and a sense of control that, okay, there's something here. I've got this, I can do it. And it was trial and error. Many, many things worked, many things didn't work so well. And there was a lot of things that needed tweaking, as I went along to make it work for my body. So yeah, so that was the start of it. I found a bit my baseline after that. and I was able to start building in some movement into my routine, some more structure into my daily routine. Um, yeah, regularity with sleep, regularity with social interactions, regularity with activity and rest cycles. Um, yeah, and I was starting, it was a slow journey, but that's how I gradually, um, yeah, pushed a little, sometimes took steps backwards, but then was able to push a little bit more and just quietly, very, very gently grow out this capacity. I was playing the long game. That's what I had to do. And yeah, the challenges along the way were really tough because, you do have to learn to say no. And it's not just saying no to the things you don't want to do either, is it? It's saying no to some things that you actually want to do. So that was hard. It's like a sense of short-term pain for longer-term gain. It's a sacrifice, but it was sort of coming back to myself, my core goal, which was recovery, and just holding that every moment, and that was my sort of my direction, where I was going. Yeah, and it meant adjusting my mindset because, as I described, before I was this doer, I was this action person, helping, achieving. So that was one of the hardest things, is adapting this sort of mindset, and learning a different way to the ways you've always done things. And of course, that's a bit hit and miss in the beginning when you start trying different ways. But gradually, it just becomes easier and more of the normal response. So yeah, so that's how I did it.
Yeah. And I think, you just touched on something, I did an episode, I think it was earlier this year, that was called sort of 5 themes of recovery. Because I got asked this question, what do all your guests do to get better? And I'm thinking, well, their stories are all so different, but I can't just say that it's one thing. So I went through all of the recovery stories and looked at, everybody's journey. And I realized that although there weren't, a couple of the same things that they were doing, there were some very distinct themes. And one of those was that sort of consistency. So it's consistently doing those little things.
Mm,
So for most people, recovery isn't one big thing. It's consistently doing little things over time. And that
mm,
those little things do change. You said that sometimes you had to adapt things, but you kept going with those little things over time with that goal in mind,
mm,
rather than sort of falling back into the boom and bust, which is very, very easy to do because, as you say, we have to say no to things that we want to do. We
mm,
desperately want to do, or maybe are being made to feel that we should do, if it's work, for example, or family commitments or things like that. And it's very, very, very difficult to sort of stand your ground and advocate for yourself, for anybody, but particularly when you're so unwell. It's very, very difficult to do that. Um, but I love what you were saying about, finding that first thing that helped to kind of sort of create a bit of space, and for you it was nutrition. For me, it was breathing. That was the first thing that really helped me. But it's finding that first thing in your journey, because it gives you that little bit of hope. It gives you a little bit of space. It gives you a little bit more capacity, and then you continue. And the trial and error is real.
mm,
That's why recovery is so non-linear, isn't it?
mm,
Because in order to work it out, we do have to do things that don't work. And I think certainly for me, I was very judgmental on myself about that. It was very sort of, oh, you idiot, you've done it wrong again, you've overdone it. Why did you do that? Well, that was part of the process. Um, and you were saying about, you had to sort of shift your mindset. And I think that very much comes for me into what you were saying there. It's that being kind to yourself when things don't go well. as well as when they do.
Mm.
Um, so you were talking about balancing activity and rest, I think was the words you used.
Mm.
And for me, and I think for a lot of people, this idea of rest, I mean, it's not something we want to do anyway. It's boring. um, but also, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the word rest. Because for me, before I became unwell, rest, watching TV or reading a book or, making cake in the kitchen, that's all rest. Climbing mountains would even come under rest for me because it was not work. Um, but I would love to hear a bit more about what your ideas of rest were and what forms of rest you found helpful in that kind of balance of activity versus rest.
Yeah, this is an amazing question, and what pops into my mind is me being completely at a loss to be able to answer this question, what is rest, at the beginning of my illness. Didn't have a clue. Like you, I was like, okay, so if it's not watching TV, like you say, doing something more of a lower level activity, that's all I ever knew. And I actually tweeted a post in 2021, what is rest? I needed help. I was so lost. But yeah, things I would do, like watching TV would hurt my eyes, dependent. I couldn't really process a lot of the content that I was consuming. So that wasn't rest because clearly it was an active process, wasn't it, in understanding this
Yeah.
content. So, okay, so that wasn't rest. Of course, I was potsy, so I couldn't have a bath. That would just make my symptoms worse. Um, you know, uh, okay, sleep, but sleep is sleep. You can only do that for so long. Yeah, and actually that sort of takes away if you do it for so long as well. Anyway, in answer to your question, I started with breath work. I'm a physiotherapist, so I've got a background in some in the breath. So I had some experience of working with that with other people. Yeah, so I signed up to a breathwork program, and from there I kind of moved into meditation. I had to do meditation lying down because I couldn't maintain an upright position. So I did the breath work and the meditation lying down in the first probably year or so. Yeah, so they were my two biggest forms of rest, really. I used to do some like maybe guided yoga nidra type sessions as well, which are really sort of down regulating and takes you to that lovely sort of in between sleep and awake state. Yeah, and I kind of got to feel that, oh, okay, this rest thing is not so bad, it's not doing. And that's the thing, I've gone back to the mindset is being okay with not doing all the time, and allowing ourselves the space and allowing ourselves the rest. And yeah, I kind of got quite interested in sort of the culture of that. Like you mentioned about the expectations and the shoulds. Yeah, but we're human beings, we're not machines, we're not doing machines. So yeah, once I sort of realized that I had this belief due to the culture that I live in that rest was a bad thing, but actually what was real was that my body needed rest and that my body was my priority, so that I could heal and be well, then I was okay with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's so difficult, isn't it? And I think,
Mm.
there is also a gender thing. I think, as a female, we do feel like we have to work harder. We have more responsibilities, particularly around family and children for people who have them. Um, and that sort of not being able to rest or not feeling like we're able to rest. And as I said, it's not something I had ever even considered that I should. I sort of was the other way round. I thought I shouldn't. And, I was also a massive fan of Yoga Nidra. It's magic. There's something about it that is magical, and I hated it to start with because I was so bored and I felt so uncomfortable in that stillness because I'd never been in stillness before in my entire life. And then over time, I just felt like I got that overwhelming sense of peace when I did something like a yoga nidra or a breathing exercise that worked for me, or a breathing meditation or something like this. And I'd never experienced that before. And over time, it did become something that I actually really enjoyed and that I still build into my life now. It's part of my daily practice, is my morning breathing practice. And I think it's, as you said, that kind of mindset shift of, rather than I shouldn't rest, actually, in order to be a happy, healthy, functioning human being, you have to rest. It's not
Mm.
a should or a shouldn't. It is a fundamental need for our body. And if we don't rest in the right amount in the right way, then the body starts tipping into that unhealthy state. And eventually it will really let us know, kind of thing. And I have much more of an appreciation for that now than I ever have. I mean, I still fall into, I logged on today and I was like, hi, Karen, it's nice to meet you. My day is chaos. Um, and, that still happens, but I like to think that I'm usually able to balance that out with my swim this afternoon. Here's hoping. So yeah, I do think it's something that we often don't appreciate until we've sort of been forced into it, and then have this sort of new sort of appreciation. Um, so you were saying how you had found the sort of nutrition, the balance between the sort of the rest and the sort of activity, and sort of gradually expanding and trial and error. And, this sort of, I think many people will sort of be very able to relate to some of that.
Mm.
Um, what did that kind of final trajectory towards recovery look like? And how did you know that you were recovered? What did that look like? We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Well, let's see. So I've got to, if we fast forward a little bit then to 2024, sort of spring 2024, I was back in work. So I was working 30 hours. I was working 50% in the office, 50% from home. I was back, being an active parent. Much to the disappointment of my children because they were being nagged again. Yeah, I was doing my exercise, I was doing my movement, I was engaging in hobbies, and I learned a lot of new hobbies actually through the illness, which brought me, great pleasure. So, like playing the piano, for example, and I go paddleboarding now too. So I just love the water and gardening. I found I've got an allotment now. I found gardening during my illness. So yeah, so I was having quite this sort of this full life. I'm still having reduced cognitive capacity, but that was kind of more. It wasn't booming and busting. It was more of a sort of a stable new level. I was still having migraines and tinnitus. Yeah. And then I found a lump in the pit of my throat. So, yeah, so I got that investigated, had a biopsy, and the biopsy was inconclusive. So I had to have surgery, and I had half my thyroid removed. And luckily I did, because that lump did actually turn out to be cancer. Yeah, so that was a bit of a curveball. Um, as it happened, it was all contained within the surgical removal. Um, and I decided not to have any further treatment. So how that evolved then from the recovery from the surgery was that I started to notice I haven't had a migraine for a while, you know. Oh, I haven't noticed tinnitus for a while. So effectively, I think that those two remaining symptoms that I'd always thought of were long COVID symptoms. They left my body with that surgery, with that part of my thyroid. I don't suffer from those problems anymore. Um, and I don't know. I don't know how long that cancer had been there. It was 30 mil, so it's quite big. So, and I can see it back in photos from 2023 in my throat. So I think, yeah, the honest truth is I don't know is what was long COVID and what was thyroid cancer, because the symptoms are quite similar. Maybe, yeah, yeah, that maybe they overlapped. Maybe I was recovered from long COVID sooner, and I was just living with symptoms of thyroid cancer. I can't work out where there was the end of one and where there was the beginning of another. So by really autumn 2024, I was experiencing this new lease of life, this new sense of wellness and just gratitude, strong, beautiful sense of gratitude for life and for health and for absence of symptoms, and yes, I don't multitask like I used to. I need to focus and concentrate on tasks now. So from a cognitive perspective, I'm not as sharp as I was prior to long COVID, but I don't care. It's me, and I embrace that and I accept it, and it's who I am, and I'm here and I'm alive and I'm well and I'm blessed, and it's my passion now and my sense of purpose to support other people that are living through these experiences, because I know, like I said, as much as I knew about it, I couldn't do it alone. So I'm here to connect with others and to support others, and that's my real passion now.
Yeah, and like that, must have been an absolutely terrifying experience on top of your experience with long COVID. And if that wasn't a test of your resilience, I don't know what would be. And that actually, not only did you not crumble under that, you came out stronger from what must have been a really quite like, dude, what next? Kind of thing almost, not to make light of it at all, but you must have felt like, what is the world going to throw at me now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, that sense of resilience? Because, the
Mm,
truth is that we're not in control.
mm,
Life's going to unfold and life's going to happen. Um, you know, as it does. And we just have to
yeah,
sort of embrace it and to do what we can in the face of it, really. I mean, what made it difficult for me further was during last year, things were changing with my job.
yeah,
Um, my service was being closed by the organisation that I worked for, so that was a real sense of distress. Um, so that coupled with, the backlog of the cancer, the long COVID, general life stuff as well. Um, I guess and the resilience comes from you just got to roll with it. You know, what else can you do?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I'm one of these people that likes to control things. And the sort of more out of control things get, the more I try to control them. And, you can't do that with anything in life, really, can you? But particularly when, something health-wise comes at you, it's kind of like this total terrifying feeling of an out of control. And the more you try to control it, the worse it gets almost, because we then get more and more stressed and our body feels more and more under threat.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that resilience really is that we are able to surf those waves rather than sort of sink underneath them, to use yet another water metaphor. Um, so you said that there was work stress over the last year. So what does life look like for you kind of now?
Wow. So yesterday actually was the last day of my employment with the NHS. Yeah. So
Congratulations.
thank you. It's the start of a exciting new chapter for me. Um, yeah, as I said, I was working in this field in the NHS, and um, the organisation that I worked for closed the service. So what I decided to do is uh, is pursue this line of work on a private basis because of my own experience and how it's all sort of interweaved. It's really important to me that people get the support that they need. And like you said, the best people, in my opinion, to support people that have fatigue and illness are people that have experienced it themselves. Because I've done both. I've been that professional who hasn't had lived experience. And now I do. It's, it's a completely different offering, you know,
Yeah,
much more meaningful, I hope anyway. Mm. Yeah,
yeah.
so I've launched my business, Sage Health and Wellness. And effectively, what I've done is developed an education program for people to, in bite-sized chunks, understand a lot of the learning that goes behind finding baseline, for example, what pacing really means. There's modules on nutrition and sleep, and I've done a lot of training as well to enhance my skills obviously I've got this foundation as a physiotherapist, so movement and breathing is kind of second nature to me. But I've been really excited to add on some education. I've learned coaching, therapeutic nutrition, and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So I really wanted to give people this really rounded offer so that they weren't having to sort of pick different services for different facets of the illness. So yeah, we talk about mindset in the program too, and sort of overcoming those kind of automatic responses that might develop into barriers for on our recovery journey. So I'm really excited actually to be able to launch that and share it with people.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I think you're right, the people who have experienced it, have this very unique and important perspective that someone who hasn't got the lived experience doesn't have, and that doesn't mean that they can't help, but it does mean that they don't fully understand what that feels like to experience that. So yeah, I think that's amazing. And I love what you said about learning as well, because I found this as well. I didn't realize how much I need to learn. It's something that I have within me. It's this curiosity about everything. And I just need to know more. Oh, I want to know about that. Oh, I want to know about that. And,
Mm.
I just want to do more trainings in this and more trainings in that. And I have to rein it in sometimes. But it's kind of like this whole experience has unleashed it for me, and it makes me much better at what I do.
Mm.
So I think that's amazing. I love that you found that too.
Mm.
Um, so I guess finally, what advice would you give yourself with the sort of benefit of hindsight? So Karen version 2, looking
Mhm.
back on yourself from before when you were unwell and struggling?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was so hard on myself back then, Jackie. I would just say,
Oh,
take your foot off your neck. It's okay. You don't have to be that way. You don't have to do all the doing. It's okay to rest. It doesn't make you any more or less of a person. You're okay and you're valuable as you are, however you show up, whatever the symptoms are looking like, whatever your productivity looks like, even if it's zero, whether you've got greasy hair, or you can't do things for people, whatever that looks like, you're still enough. Mm,
absolutely. And I think
mm.
that is a very beautiful sentiment to finish on. Karen, thank you so much for coming along and giving up your time on a very hot day to share your story and to offer some helpful ideas and tips and hope for people listening. So, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jackie. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch